Safety Alerts wants to know, as long as we're talking about latency, shouldn't they be thinking about the video latency? Yeah, absolutely. Latency is a loop. The loop is from the controls. Let's start at the control sticks. It's a loop, so you can start anywhere you want. It's from the control sticks. You move the control stick, the signal goes through the mixer and Express LRS out to the module, from the module out to the air, through the air to the receiver, out the receiver to the flight controller. The flight controller reads the stick positions. The flight controller runs the PID loop and runs the filters. The flight controller at the end of the loop determines the new motor outputs. The flight controller transmits the new motor signal output out the motors to the ESC. The ESC changes the motor speed, which takes time due to momentum and mass, or inertia rather. The motor changes speed, the prop pushes on the air. The quadcopter begins to move. That movement is picked up by the camera. The camera sends that signal back through the video transmitter, back to the goggles, out to the screen, into your eyes, into your brain. Your brain thinks about what it's seeing and decides what to do with your fingers, and that's the whole control loop. And my assertion is that every part of that loop, the latency is all of equal importance. So if you remove 10 milliseconds of latency from your video link, my assertion is that that is indistinguishable from removing 10 milliseconds of latency from the control link. At the end of the day, what is your brain aware of? You moved the sticks, and some amount of time later, your eyeball saw the quadcopter move. I don't think you can tell, and I have no proof of this. This is a pure, unsupported hypothesis. I can't think how you would test it, because that's very hard to control all these variables and only change one of them. But my assertion is, you move the sticks, the control loop happens, your eyes see the quad move on the screen, and that total latency is actually the only thing you can be aware of that affects your experience of flying the quad. 10 milliseconds in the control link, 10 milliseconds in the video link, I don't think you could tell the difference. So then if you have a 30 millisecond video link, does it matter if you have 4 milliseconds shaved off of your control link? Well, 4 milliseconds is a lot less than 30. I think what really matters, though, is the total percent by which you have reduced the overall control loop. So, for example, I'm gonna take a big risk and do math on stream, which always ends badly because I make some dumb mistake. But 1/8 kilohertz is 125 nanoseconds, less than a millisecond. So if you go from an 8K PID loop to a 4K PID loop, you've doubled that to 250 nanoseconds. Doesn't matter. It might matter in terms of the PID loop and your prop wash handling, but in terms of the latency that you perceive, that you cannot detect that. Okay? So there are some parts of the control loop that are so fast that doesn't matter from the perspective of your perception of the latency of the control loop. And the PID loop is one of them. D-Shot 300 versus D-Shot 600. It's possible that there is a pilot out there who could tell some difference in the way the quad flies between D-Shot 300 and D-Shot 600. But that difference, I submit, is not latency, because the difference in latency between those two protocols is so ridiculously small that it's just beyond human perception. So which parts of the control loop have latency that might be perceptible to a human? And two of those are the video link and the control link, which have latency in the, say, for video, it's maybe between 15 and 30 milliseconds. And for control, depending on your control link, it's maybe between 2 and 30 milliseconds for a really slow one, like an old S-Bus link. And that's why we focus on those so much. So what's the total control link latency? I mean, I don't know, but it's at least your control link plus your video link. So let's say for Crossfire, that's maybe 16 milliseconds. And for DJI, that's maybe 30 milliseconds. So we have 45, 46 milliseconds. At that point, if you knock 4 milliseconds off of that, one way to look at that is it's 4 milliseconds. Who could possibly notice? Another way to look at it is you knock 10% off your control link, off your control loop. And that's kind of, maybe a big deal. I'm sorry, microseconds, not milliseconds. Milliseconds, microseconds, nanoseconds. I told you it was risky to do math on stream. So I just go blah, 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 and I don't cross-check anything. And then I say something dumb. So there you go. Thank you, hello FPV, for knowing the metric system. Excuse me. Oh. But my point is that I think that if your total latency is in the range of 30 to 50 milliseconds, knocking 5 or 10 milliseconds off that, probably some people could notice that. If your total latency was in the range of 100 milliseconds, knocking 5 or 10 milliseconds off that, maybe it wouldn't make as much of a difference.